Okay, so that classic line about plastics from that movie, The Graduate, there's great future in plastics.
Oh, yeah.
Well, turns out here in 2024, not so much. We're really seeing the downsides now. So in this deep dive, we're going to explore, the hidden costs of all this supposed business success, those externalities, that we all end up picking up the tab for. And to help us dig into this, we're cracking open Christopher Marquis' 2024 book, The Profiteers. It really exposes how companies, shift costs onto society. And then it also explores some solutions, some kind of coming from some surprising places.
Yeah, it's pretty wild when you start to scratch beneath the surface of a company's success and you see what they're really about.
Yeah.
A good example is think about Amazon during the pandemic.
Right.
I mean, their profits, they went through the roof, over 200% increase, but at what cost, right?
Exactly.
They were touting their whole climate pledge, promising to go carbon neutral, but then at the same time, their labor practices told a very different story.
Yeah, and Marquis actually, he uses this really kind of heartbreaking example in the book about this family. They bought a remote on Amazon, right?
Okay.
And the battery cover was faulty, and tragically their daughter, she was little, she swallowed one of the batteries, and it caused permanent damage to her esophagus.
Yeah.
But get this, Amazon basically just washed their hands of it. They said they weren't liable because it was fulfilled by a third-party seller.
Mm.
I mean, talk about a chilling reminder, right? Every time you hit add to cart, there could be hidden costs.
Absolutely, and that's just one example of there's so many out there. Think about all the Amazon employees who are relying on public assistance because their wages are so low.
Yeah.
I mean, are we as taxpayers essentially subsidizing Amazon's workforce? It's a big question. And the economist Mariana Mazzucato, she's got this book, The Value of Everything, and she argues that, players like this, they might just be transferring, existing value to themselves. They're not creating new value. It's something to think about. Who's really benefiting from these business models?
Yeah, are they just kind of gaming the system?
Yeah.
It's wild. And speaking of hidden costs, how do we even put a dollar amount on something like pollution?
Yeah.
Right? It's not as simple as comparing prices at the store.
Yeah, and you've hit on a huge problem with externalities. They're incredibly difficult to put an actual price on. A really good example, actually, is the social cost of carbon. The Obama administration, they calculated it really meticulously, taking into account all of the long-term effects, and they came up with $43 per ton of carbon. But then the Trump administration comes along, clearly influenced by the fossil fuel lobby, and what do? They slash that cost to just $1 per ton, just by changing the discount rate.
Whoa. So, convenient math to fit an agenda.
Yeah, exactly. It makes you wonder, are we really getting the full picture, or are the numbers being massaged to tell a certain story?
Right. Yeah, exactly. But how do companies get away with this, right? Are we just blindly accepting these narratives?
I mean, not entirely, but corporations, they've become masters at this thing called corporate gaslighting, right? Where they're manipulating information so that they can shift blame and responsibility.
That is sneaky.
Remember that iconic crying Indian ad campaign from back in the 70s? The one with the, Native American with the tear rolling down his face as he's paddling through a polluted river.
Oh, yeah, that was supposed to be about, stopping pollution,
yeah.
Right.
Ironically, it was funded by companies like Coca-Cola and Dixie Cup, companies that were producing tons of plastic and actually actively lobbying against any environmental initiatives. It's they shifted the blame onto individuals, telling them to be more responsible with their trash while completely downplaying their own role in polluting the planet.
Wow, the irony is strong with that one. Don't blame the corporations making all this plastic. Blame the person who drops a bottle on the street.
Exactly. And sadly, this kind of misdirection, it's more common than you might think.
Really?
Take astroturfing, for example.
Astroturfing?
Yeah, it's where they create these fake grassroots organizations to push their agenda.
Oh, sneaky.
The Western States Petroleum Association, they did this. They created these fake groups to spread climate denial and try to kill any legislation aimed at fighting climate change. They're literally manufacturing public opinion to protect their own profits.
So it's all smoke and mirrors, right? Designed to confuse the public and delay any meaningful action.
Exactly. And unfortunately, they have a whole bag of tricks. Another classic move is rebranding.
Right.
After that whole Deepwater Horizon oil spill, you know what BP did?
What did they do?
They tried to reinvent themselves as Beyond Petroleum, trying to make everyone think they were all about green energy.
Right.
But have their actions really shown that? I mean, their track record on the environment, it's still pretty shaky, to put it mildly.
So it's all about appearances? Just got to look good to the public, don't actually have to change anything.
Sadly, yeah, a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And then you've got those straight up misleading claims.
Oh, wait, like, wait.
Keurig's a good example.
Okay.
For years, they were telling Canadians their coffee pods were recyclable.
Really?
The catch. Most recycling places in Canada, they wouldn't take them.
Oh, come on.
Toronto alone had to fish out like 90 tons of these so-called recyclable pods from their bins. It makes you wonder if recyclable even means anything anymore.
It's infuriating. They're taking advantage of us wanting to do the right thing. It feels like, some economists, they even play a part in this whole thing, whether they mean to or not.
It's true. Some economists, often the ones funded by these industries, they end up normalizing these bad practices. They're plugging skewed data into their models, spitting out reports that support these agendas, and then it's all presented as, objective analysis.
Right, so then the average person, they just feel lost.
Exactly. It's a mess, really.
Totally. Okay, so then what about those net zero goals companies are always bragging about?
Right.
Given all this gaslighting, can we actually believe any of it?
That's where it gets even trickier, right? Net zero can mean a whole lot of creative accounting and relying on those carbon offsets we talked about, which are, well,
Yeah. Okay, let's break down these net zero pledges. We hear so much about them, but what's the reality? Take Netflix, for example. They love to talk about how sustainable they are.
Oh, yeah.
But is that really the whole story?
That is a perfect example. What they always leave out is all the energy their viewers are using on their devices.
Okay.
They're basically saying, hey, our servers are green, but whatever you do to actually watch our stuff, not our problem. Again, shifting the responsibility.
So, classic cherry-picking data. Make themselves look good. Are there any companies that are actually honest about how hard it is to be truly sustainable?
You know what? Seventh generation, they're a nice exception.
Yeah.
They've admitted that their emissions actually went up as their sales grew. They're not shying away from the fact that making money and not hurting the planet at the same time, it's really tough. You rarely see that kind of honesty from a company.
It's refreshing, actually, being transparent like that. It builds more trust than trying to hide everything. But what about those carbon offsets everyone's always talking about? Are they a real solution or just a Band-Aid?
So in theory, carbon offsets, they let companies say, okay, we polluted here, but we're making up for it by investing in projects that reduce emissions somewhere else. Sounds good, right? But in reality, it's a minefield.
Okay, give me the rundown. What are the red flags?
First, there's additionality.
Additionality meaning?
Meaning, how do we know this offset project wouldn't have happened anyway? Like, paying to protect a forest that was already protected, that doesn't actually help.
Right.
Then there's permanence.
Okay.
Say a company pays to protect a forest, great, but what if those trees get chopped down a few years later? All that carbon goes right back into the atmosphere.
So it's a temporary fix, not a real solution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And lastly, there's leakage.
Leakage.
Yeah, like what if that offset, it just shifts the emissions somewhere else? A company protects a forest in one country, but that leads to more deforestation in another country. No net change.
It sounds like these offsets are more about making companies feel better than actually making a difference.
You got it.
Frustrating.
They can distract from actually reducing emissions at the source, Even those nature-based solutions like planting trees, they often miss the mark.
How so?
It's not as easy as just sticking trees in the ground.
Right.
You need the right trees in the right place, managed the right way for the long haul. It's complicated.
It's disheartening. It feels like all these promises about sustainability, they just turn out to be empty. Is there any hope? Are there companies out there that are actually doing things differently?
There are some really inspiring examples of companies challenging the status quo, showing us a different way is possible.
Okay, I need to hear this.
Like Allbirds, they want to hit net zero emissions, but without using those iffy carbon offsets.
Okay.
They even teamed up with their competitor, Adidas.
No way, really?
Yep, to create a low-carbon sneaker. Its carbon footprint is like 80% lower than your average running shoe.
Wow, that's putting your money where your mouth is. Teaming up with a competitor like that, that's a strong message. Says they're not just in it for themselves. Any other companies like that?
Numi Organic Tea is doing great things too.
What are they doing?
They're putting carbon footprint labels right on their tea boxes.
Interesting.
Makes you think about the energy that goes into that cup of tea, even the energy to boil the water. It's about honesty and showing the consumer what's what.
I love that. No hiding, just bringing the consumer along, gives us the power to make better choices. Any other companies taking it beyond just labels, actually trying to get us to make more sustainable choices?
Just salad's a great example.
Okay.
They have a carbon-labeled menu now.
What? Really?
Yeah, shows you the environmental impact of every dish, and they highlight the climatarian choices, the ones with a lower footprint.
Clever.
And get this, sales of those dishes went up by 10%?
See, it proves that people want to make good choices. They just need the information presented in a clear way. But it also shows that it can't just be a few companies doing the right thing. We need a total system overhaul, don't we?
Absolutely. It's bigger than just minimizing harm now. We need to embrace things like regenerative economics.
Okay, tell me more about this regenerative economics idea.
It's about shifting from taking to actually restoring and giving back.
I like it.
Take Replant Capital, for example. They're putting money into regenerative agriculture, helping farmers switch from those chemical-heavy methods to ones that are good for the soil, increase biodiversity, actually capture carbon.
So creating a system that gives back more than it takes.
Exactly. And it's not just about farming. This idea of circularity is key, too. Instead of that old take, make, trash model, how do we make things that eliminate waste completely?
I am all for less waste. What are some companies that are making that happen?
Green Circle Salons is a cool one.
Okay.
They work with hair salons to collect and reuse all that beauty waste. Hair clippings, chemical containers, all of it.
Wow.
Turns trash into something valuable, saves the salons money, and keeps tons of garbage out of landfills.
That's amazing, turning a problem into a solution. Are there bigger companies doing this circularity thing too?
Oh yeah, Cascade Engineering, they do plastic injection molding. They've gone all in on zero waste.
Yeah.
They looked at everything they do, started recycling programs, redesigned products. They're proving that zero waste isn't just some dream, it can be good for business.
So good for the planet and the bottom line.
Uh-huh.
I like it. Any companies taking it even further, like beyond just zero waste?
Interface, they make carpet tiles. They've got this really innovative approach.
Tell me.
Instead of selling carpets, they lease them.
Interesting.
They own the tiles, they install them, take care of them, and then when they're done, they take them back to be recycled or reused. It's a closed loop.
That's so smart. Ultimate recycling. Are there any, laws that could encourage more companies to adopt this circular way of thinking?
Extended producer responsibility laws, or EPR laws, are starting to gain traction.
EPR laws, what are those?
They make producers responsible for their products through the entire life cycle, even after you buy it.
Oh, interesting.
They're big in Europe already. It pushes companies to design things for recyclability and reuse right from the start.
Makes sense. Make the producers accountable for the whole life of the product. But we can't forget about the people in all of this. We've talked a lot about the environmental cost. But what about the human cost of business in this system?
Yeah, there have been some, thankfully. Like in California, Uber and Lyft, they were forced to recognize their drivers as employees.
Oh, wow.
So now they have to give them minimum wage, overtime, benefits, all of that.
It's about time.
It's a huge win for workers, and hopefully it'll set a precedent.
Fingers crossed. But this exploitation thing, it's bigger than just the gig economy, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's baked into the whole system. Think about those payday loan places.
Ugh.
They go after people who are living paycheck to paycheck, get them trapped in debt with these crazy interest rates.
It's predatory.
Totally. They profit off of people being desperate.
So awful. What can we do to break that cycle, give workers some real financial security?
One thing that's showing promise is earned wage access, or EWA.
EWA. Okay.
Yeah, companies like PayActive are doing this.
How's it work?
It lets people get their paycheck as they earn it instead of waiting for payday.
Oh, smart.
Helps people avoid those predatory loans, handle unexpected expenses, just be in control of their money.
I love that. Give people access to what they've already earned. It seems like a lot of these problems come from companies just not investing in their employees at all.
You're right. A lot of them, they see workers as disposable, don't bother with training or development.
Right.
Amazon's a classic example. Their turnover rate is insane.
Yeah.
They don't care about creating a workplace where people feel supported and can grow.
So short-sighted. It's got to be bad for business in the end.
Totally. It hurts everyone. Then you've got companies like Sama doing things so much better.
Okay, what do we do?
They offer digital work, but they also have these great training programs, especially for women in developing countries.
Awesome.
They're not just creating jobs, they're creating opportunities.
That's what it's all about. Seeing the value in every worker. All this stuff we've been talking about, the externalities, the exploitation, the gaslighting, It all comes back to wealth inequality, doesn't it?
100%. It's the root of so many problems.
It really is.
Leads to bias in lending, bad schools, keeps people trapped in poverty. We have to tackle that if we want a better future.
Big systemic problem. So where do we go from here? It all feels kind of overwhelming. We need more than just a few good companies, right?
Yeah.
We need to rethink how business works, period.
I agree. We need a new model, one that puts people and the planet first, not just shareholder profits. Transparency, accountability, and thinking long-term. That's what matters.
Okay, I'm with you. But how do we get there? What are some real steps?
Well, benefit corporations are interesting.
What's that?
It's a legal structure, makes companies consider all stakeholders, not just shareholders.
Okay.
Their social and environmental impact, it's part of their legal obligation, not just a side thing.
I like that, like baked into their DNA. Any examples of that working?
Danone, the yogurt company,
Okay.
did it. They're an enterprise mission, that's what they call it in France, and they're inspiring other big companies to do the same.
So it can be done, even on a big scale.
Yeah, and it's not just them. Lemonade, Vital Farms, Allbirds, they're all benefit corporations and they're publicly traded.
So you can do good and do well in the stock market.
Exactly. But we need to hold the other companies accountable too, the ones that aren't doing the right thing. Shareholder activism is one way.
How so?
Groups like, as you saw, the shareholder commons, they're using their power as investors to push for change.
Right.
Filing resolutions, advocating for better policies, calling out companies on climate risks, inequality, all of that.
Hit them where it hurts, the bottom line. But not everyone can be a shareholder. What about regular people? How can we support the good companies?
Crowdfunding is great for that. Platforms like WeFunder, Indiegogo, they let you invest directly in startups that are trying to make a difference.
So you can put your money where your values are.
Exactly. But yeah, like you said, we need to rethink the whole idea of a corporation.
Right? Like this whole thing about their only job being to make money for shareholders, that's got to change.
It does. Employee ownership is an interesting alternative.
Yeah.
The Mondragon Corporation in Spain, it's a worker-owned cooperative. Super successful, shows that you can have a business that's owned and run by the workers, and they prioritize sustainability and sharing the wealth.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So after this deep dive into the Profiteers, it's clear that we can't keep doing business as usual.
Definitely not.
We've uncovered the hidden costs, manipulation, the systemic issues. But we've also seen the hope.
Right.
Companies and individuals who are fighting for something better, showing us a different way is possible.
It is.
This deep dive, it's giving you the knowledge to see through the BS and demand better from the companies you support, from the system itself.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to ask tough questions.
Exactly. Because when companies push their costs onto society, we're the ones left holding the bag. As consumers, as citizens, as human beings on this planet, we're all stakeholders.
It's time to question everything, demand transparency, hold corporations accountable, and create a future where everyone and everything can thrive. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.